I just want to say what a real pleasure it is for me, and Barry's sitting next to me nodding away as well, to re-engage with people that we've worked with during their initial education, to hear that some of the stuff that we shared with you then is making a difference, and you're still engaging with that now. So that's just lovely to hear from former students. So thank you so much for your time, and especially for giving up your lunch break to join us this afternoon. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that Elspeth was talking about, their traditional and authentic partnerships. I'm going to come back to in my slides, and maybe say a wee bit more about that. But I'm going to go back now and talk about the group overall and the kind of work that we've been doing over the years. I'm going to try and keep an eye on time because I could talk about this forever. So I think Elspeth was involved in the first year where we did things. I think Elspeth graduated in 2017. I think that's right. So the 2016-17 year was when we had ITE students on PGDE programs, both primary and secondary, were helping out with workshops run by people working in family learning, community learning and development, but in a family learning role at that time. And they were kind of shadowing family learning workers with a view to possibly using those kinds of approaches in their own practice. And at the same time, we had final year students on the MA primary education, which we used to run at Edinburgh at the time, who were doing projects around that, research projects. And so they were interviewing students and people involved in it. And then we had a half-day seminar where we shared those experiences and research findings. And the next year, Alison was involved. So I think Alison graduated in 2018, I think. And that year, we tried to, having learned from the first year, we tried to embed some more of that kind of practical stuff rather than just doing it on a voluntary basis for one or two people, because that's, well, it was about 5 people actually we could accommodate in the first year. We wanted to kind of expand that a bit. So Vary, and it was Jen Harwood, wasn't it, from Scottish Book Trust at the time, put on some workshops. Vary came along in the evening on time to work with students, to show them how to use the kinds of activities, to talk about a family learning approach, to introduce the students to the Read, Write, Count books. I did some lectures on some of the core ITE programs at that time as well. So that was the second year. And then I think it was the third year, we kind of changed a wee bit, and we decided that actually one of the questions that came up a lot was about family learning and parental engagement with older primary pupils. And so we decided to do some research on that. And we invited student teachers who were on placement to help us with the data collection in primary schools with primary 5, 6 and 7 pupils about their attitudes about parents' engagement, what they wanted in terms of the connection between home and school. Throughout as well, we've also been researching problems posed by partners in practice. So any part of the Murray House Read, Write, Count team was able to say, look, this is a question I've got that I would really like some answers to. And we've been inviting MSc students to address some of those questions through their MSc dissertation. So that's been kind of ongoing across the years we've been working. And then I honestly can't remember what year it was. I think it was 2019 or 2020. We were successful in getting some funding from the Scottish Government Equity and Equalities Project for to employ someone to do some workshops on family learning, pivot online because of COVID, and that then changed into a project where it was Barbara who was working on developing videos for schools and families she was like 3 or 4 minute videos to show people the kind of activities they could do based on the books that were in the Read, Write, Count book bags. And some of our students from Murray House who shared some community language then translated those for us. So that was the involvement of the students that year. We also did some webinars for students and teachers looking at the resources that Barbara had created. And there's been ongoing input into some of the ITE programs, literacy strands, and into CLPL, run by Regional Improvement Collaboratives or by Education Scotland and local authorities. And so that's kind of the sort of stuff that we've been doing over the last sort of 7 years. What I want to talk about a bit is some of the research that has come out of that, because this isn't just not just sounds like I'm diminishing it. Even if it was just a kind of a collaborative group, that would be fine. But actually, what's been really nice for me is to be able to help bring some of the learning that we've done through that group to a wider audience and to an academic audience. And I know that some of these publications here are used in staff development and training and ITE programs elsewhere. So The two articles at the top there by myself and Lynn Tett, I'm going to talk about them in a wee bit more detail later. The Chen and Macleod, this is an example of a master's student who was addressing a question posed by one of the members of the group, and she did a systematized reviews, and then that was published. Lynn and I have written something more about family literacy practices during COVID based on an evaluation of Barbara's work when we had the pivot online. And this one at the bottom is probably one I'm most proud of. It's not quite out yet. It's going to come out in the Scottish Education Review. But if you see the authors there, that's the Murray House Read Write Count group at that time, and that's based on the questionnaire we sent out to older primary schools in primary 5, 6 and 7 about what they wanted from school. So that is available. It's going to be open access, and so if anybody wants a copy of that, just ask me and I can send it to you. Okay, so just before I move on to talk about some of that peer-reviewed research, it's important to note that there's ongoing research generated by this group. So there was the fourth-year honours projects that I mentioned earlier, these MSc dissertations. So I've talked about the systematic review that Danley did. We also had a student working on school libraries and secondary schools. We had somebody working, looking at how parental engagement or relationships between home and school are affected when the young person has very particular additional support needs, where the parents are clearly the experts in that young person, and how that kind of shifted the balance a bit. Somebody else looked at teacher confidence, didn't they, in teaching and working with parents, and I know that the data that she generated then informed some of the stuff that Evelyn was doing then in support for probationer teachers. And we also had some students researching the use of play-based curriculum in some primary schools in Edinburgh and attitudes towards that delay of formal teaching of literacy. So and then we've also had evaluations of the projects, particularly funded projects. So there's a lot of data being generated by the group that we've been using to inform practice across all these different areas. But I'm going to turn now and talk a bit more about the kind of peer-reviewed academic literature, if you like, because that's my thing. And just to start, now some of this is going to just repeat what Sandra was saying in her presentation this morning, but if it's worth saying once, it's probably worth saying twice. I'm not going to go into this in a whole lot of detail, but the references will be available in the final slide in this presentation. So just what we know, okay, what we know already. We know that parental engagement has a positive impact on children's achievement. Janet Goodall is a key researcher in this area, and that's one of her key texts there. We also know that parental engagement, family learning, all these things work best when what they're doing is they're building on what's happening at home anyway. So it's not something completely different being parachuted in. It's thinking about the kind of learning activity that's going on in the community and at home and building on that, extending that, capitalising on it. We know that one of the things that happens as a result of engaging in these kinds of activities is that children become confident about their learning capacities. Actually, parents become confident about their learning capacities as well. And that then enables them to feel confident about taking on new learning challenges. I'm not entirely in favour of the growth mindset psychology for various reasons, but I'm not going to go into that. But it's that kind of idea, right? You become confident about taking risks in your learning. It obviously has a positive impact on the relationship between home and school, and it have a positive impact on the parents' literacy, numeracy, communication, and so on. So that's the key kind of points from the research literature that inform my practice in relation to parental engagement. And it was really working with Lynn Tett, who I've already mentioned, that really kind of introduced me to this funds of knowledge idea. And this which very much comes from kind of community development and learning, which is, I think it's fair to say, underpinned by a different value base than teacher education. Funds of knowledge approach builds on the knowledge that the parents already have. So it's meeting the parents where they are. It assumes that parents have an equal role to play, that they are the experts in the children's learning, they're children's first teachers. Education is seen as cooperative, it's about respect and trust, and valuing the different things that different people bring. It supports parents to fulfil their aspirations. I know Sandra was talking about aspirations this morning, and so a funds of knowledge approach recognises that parents have aspirations for their children and helps them to fulfil those aspirations and further develop their own expertise as their child's first educator. It focuses on the things that the parents bring to it and builds on that rather than denigrating their expertise. A funds of knowledge approach is consistently shown to lead to more effective learning, so it's well established in the research literature. And all of this really comes out of work by Gonzalez, Moll and Amanti, who were working with migrant communities from Latin America, I think in Arizona, and looking at how they could help those communities support their children's learning. So that's the funds of knowledge approach, which is in contrast to a deficit approach, which tends to give priority to what the school want or the head teacher's agenda. It emphasises a lack of knowledge on the part of the parents. It doesn't really reflect on the context in which these relationships are happening, and recognising, again, it's something Sandra said, that power relationships are important here, and particularly for parents who themselves have had maybe negative experiences of schooling. We need to consider that. It assumes that parents should fit into what the school want to do, and it positions school staff as experts, and it often assumes the problem is a lack of aspiration. Now, we know from research, I've cited Kirk there, that parental aspirations are already very high. And of course, Morag trainers work on aspirations, and putting that kind of poverty of aspiration myth to bed is important, and based in the Scottish context. I'd encourage you to look at Morag's work there as well. So that was the kind of theoretical framework and principles that were informing the research that Lynn and I did. This was a research project that was informed by conversations with Vary, Karen Buis, Lorna, various other family learning workers telling us what they wanted us to find out. The research was focused on family learning in disadvantaged areas in a Scottish city. I'll let you guess which one. Small scale, so we do need to be careful about the conclusions we draw from it, but I think there is some advantages in small scale research because it allows you to look at things in depth. There was two main questions that I think we've answered in the two separate publications. Is how do different people involved in the family learning programs experience them, and what makes for more inclusive family homeschool partnerships? And you can see that Lynn and I took turns to write up the research in those things. So I'm going to talk very briefly about actually the second one of them first, about homeschool partnerships. So this is the article from 2020 that Lynn is the lead author on. And what we found through these interviews with head teachers and family learning workers and parents is that where the head teachers understood the purpose of family learning programs as being focused on the family learning programs helping them advance the school's agenda, then that made homeschool partnerships quite difficult to achieve. So as you would expect, where from the school's point of view, it was all about the school, then that wasn't facilitating partnership. But we did find that that when you had family learning professionals working between school and home, that some of those breakdowns in the relationships or kind of misunderstandings in the relationships were mitigated because the family learning workers were able to help bridge the links between home and school. So they were able to kind of translate what the school were wanting into and think about how that would then, how they could then work with that with the parents, and also try and help the parents understand what the school agenda was, but also helping them see how their knowledge and expertise could help with that. So what we found was that even in those situations where the head teachers had quite traditional views about homeschool partnerships, where family learning workers were present in the community, they were able to help bridge that gap. And we found across the schools that we looked at evidence of 3 different kinds of partnerships. These are the partnerships that Auerbach 2010 identified, and these are the ones that Elspeth was referring to in her talk: nominal, traditional, and authentic. I've got a very busy slide coming up for which I apologise. The text is quite small, but just to give you a sense of what Auerbach says about the different kinds of relationships that you can have. So traditional, that's the one that we would recognise maybe from when I was a child at school, right? So schools at the centre, so one-way direction. Parents are seen as playing a useful role, but their knowledge is defined in terms of what they lack, and there's little understanding of the relationship, the power relationships going on there. Parents may feel involved, but have very little influence over what happens there. The nominal, to the left of the slide, that's kind of partnership in name, but maybe still not quite an equal partnership. So it is accepted that involving parents is beneficial, but again, it's still about helping them contribute to helping the school increase the pupils' attainment. The parents are positioned as to help the school, and not kind of encouraging them to kind of intervene or question what's happening in the school or to make suggestions, and as a result, parents can feel alienated. We did find some evidence of some authentic homeschool partnerships, and these are ones in which that unequal power relationship is understood by the school from the start. So there's a real understanding of how difficult it can be for parents to engage. Parents are seen as allies, advocates and leaders. It's recognised that they have knowledge that is valuable and equally valuable as the knowledge that the school staff have. And as a result, parents feel that they have more agency by having some of their own cultural practices recognised. So those are the three homeschool partnerships identified by Auerbach in 2010. We found all three of them within this one city in Edinburgh. But we found the one city in Edinburgh, talk about confidentiality, sorry, we found the one city we were working in. But we found that where there was traditional partnerships, family learning workers were able to help bridge that gap. Turning to the second paper that we published from this, which is, we call the shorthand for this is the Angel Wings paper. And this paper really focused on the experiences of the parents and carers. Again, as Sandra was saying this morning, it's important to recognise when we say parents, we include adults who have a responsibility for young people in the home. So what did they get out of it? Well, they learned, it had a lasting impact. It was a retrospective study. We were interviewing people who had engaged with family learning 10 years on. So they were reflecting on that. They still remembered it. They remembered it as a really important engagement for them. Most of them remembered it as a gateway into further education. It was seen as the start of the work that they started doing, maybe getting back into employment. It helped them understand how the everyday activities they did with the children can be learning experiences. So quite often, parents, you'll be doing something with your child and you maybe wouldn't automatically label it as learning, but it was helping them say, no, you're already doing a lot of that, right? It's just you maybe not made that connection between the school curriculum. It helped them develop knowledge and skills to manage the children's behaviour. And actually that was as much just from chatting to other parents with children of the same age and sharing expertise. And that leads into that third point there. So they were sharing their expertise as well, right? So they weren't just learning from the other parents, but they were sharing their knowledge and their skills and their tips. And that gave them confidence when people valued that. They thought, oh, okay, well, we can learn, we can do things. They can, and so we are able to help our children learn. And so they became more engaged in their children's learning at school at that point because they saw themselves as having something valuable to contribute. So it was really kind of building up their confidence there. And the supportive social space, which was facilitated by family learning professionals, where what the parents wanted was respected, it was facilitated, they were given access to wider social networks. I think almost every single one of them had gone on to do further courses, further engagement. In fact, 2 of the 10 parents we spoke to had eventually gone on to do university degrees, and both of those parents said, that's because I took part in that family learning activity. It had that big a difference to parents 10 years earlier when their children were just starting school, that they began to see themselves as people who were learners and had potential. And that participation in the projects not only impacted on their self-confidence, but it also, so the phrase, and this is Lynn's phrase, I think it's lovely, it raised their horizons of possibility, right? So what they saw for themselves and their lives going forward changed, right? Because they saw themselves as able to do other things. So they considered that they could embark on new careers and ways of being. So the quote here from parents is, I felt more confident. I was confident enough to apply for college. It made me a more confident parent with the girls. It made me more confident in what I could achieve myself. The reason the paper this is from is called Angel Wings is because another lovely quote from it is somebody said, I felt like I had a pair of angel wings lifting me up. She was given a task to do, and she felt that support from the family learning work, I think it was Karen that parent had worked with, was like a pair of angel wings that just helped her do things that she never before thought that she would be able to do. So what can schools do? So I think it's important to note that not every school can employ or has access to a family learning worker. I think that is a great pity, but it is the reality that we're working in. A family learning worker, I think, needs to be somebody who has a community learning background or adult education background, because as I've said, the values underpinning that approach are quite different to the traditional teacher values that underpin teaching. But schools are still able to do something. So even if you don't have, I know there's some school staff on the call today, even if you don't have access to family learning worker, there are things that you can do. So recognizing the contributions that parents can make, and having that aim to sort of empower them to kind of welcome and celebrate the contribution that they're making. Providing training and support for staff to share the values underpinning FLNOS is the Family Learning National Occupational Standards. Great document, and that really spells out what it is that underpins family learning. And that's the document that, you know, I think sharing that with teachers. There was a question after Sandra's session this morning about, is there I think it was Fiona Robertson, is there an opportunity here for interprofessional, interdisciplinary training? Absolutely. I would love to see student teachers, student home visitors, student community learning development workers all working together in the pre-service training, sharing these kind of values and understanding that different professional groups come from different value positions. And that's okay. We're not saying all teachers should have the same values as community development workers, but we're saying that you need to acknowledge and respect and value those different principles underpin each other's work. Schools can adopt an outward-facing strategy that involves the views of all parents, as well as the expertise of other schools and services in the community. So really important that schools don't think they have to do it all themselves, right? Because you can't. It's not possible, but there are loads of kind of pockets of expertise and third sector organisations and resources there that, you know, bring them in, bring the community in, bring parents into the school, and then use those resources that are there. And then engaging in proactive collaboration with families that is sensitive to their circumstances and accords with their values. And again, that's about operating within a framework which understands the power relationships between home and school, and is kind of mindful of that in the ways in which families are engaged with. And then making the school environment welcoming, you know, a place for parents. So, you know, do you have a family room in your school? I know there are limits of school size and rooms and things like that, but, you know, can parents just come in and sit and have a cup of coffee? Are they, you know, when they come in, do they feel welcome? I mean, as a parent myself, I have been called into schools and you feel like a child sitting on the small chair, you know, outside the head teacher's office. So, you know, make them environment welcoming and value parents in that way. This is just a really lovely example, I think, of the sort of thing that when I read this, I thought, oh, right, yeah, now I get it. And it's from an article by Williams and Williams, and it's about Matzo work. And it's about, you know, just a little change that you can make, which supports this whole kind of agenda, enabling parents to be seen as experts through choice of activity. And so what they found was that when they set homework tasks, which were based on lived experience, so things that families were doing every day at home, like managing money or wrapping a parcel. So you can see how wrapping a parcel might lead to stuff about shape and size and measuring and all that kind of thing, that it led to much more engagement, because what it did was it allowed parents to be seen as the experts, right? Because the parents all have expertise in wrapping parcels, which their children don't. So the children were then more willing to accept parental feedback because they saw their parents as having expertise in that area, and that in turn enhanced parents' self-confidence. So a tiny, tiny change that you can make, just thinking about the kind of homework activities that you're setting and making sure that they're planned in such a way that they enable the parents to be positioned as the experts in that. I'm aware I'm talking to people who are probably doing all this already, right? So, you know, just saying, if you are doing that already, brilliant. Family learning in schools. Again, I think I just want to kind of emphasize this, that family learning is a distinct approach to working with families. It's based on a set of principles and values which will not yet be familiar to everybody in education. And I think that's a job of work we need to do in ITE, is to really make sure that different professional groups understand each other's value base. We do need to try and shift culture towards more authentic relationships rather than the more nominal and the traditional, and part of that is going to have to start in ITE, but there's also a role there for CL, continuing lifelong professional learning, CLPL, isn't it? And our research would suggest that one of the ways in which we can help schools move from a nominal or a traditional homeschool partnership is by using a family learning approach, ideally professionally trained family learning workers who come from that kind of community development background, to help schools make that transition. And why are we going to do it? Well, we know because there's robust evidence that if we do that, it's going to make a contribution to closing the poverty-related attainment gap, which I'm sure everybody listening to the call today is you know, could come on board with that as an aim. So final slide from me before I pass over to Barry. What my reflections on embedding parental engagement, parental involvement, family learning and learning at home into ITE is anybody working in an ITE provider, I would absolutely encourage you to develop these kind of collaborative approaches because everybody wins. So I think Vary would agree that, I'm telling you, I'm not. No, you would agree, wouldn't you? Yeah. That it's been a benefit for her and her work. It's a benefit for the student teachers. It's a benefit for Scottish Book Trust and the Read Write Count. It's a benefit for the families, right? Nobody's losing in this. I think for me, I think it's worked because we've started locally and we've built sustainable networks. And it's not been anybody's job to do it. We've done it because we're passionate about these ideas. I think it helps that we're quite flexible, that we don't have a written constitution, that we don't have defined roles, we don't have a chair, we don't have a leader, we don't have a secretary, none of that. And because it's flexible, it means that when something arrives on our agenda, or something happens, we can go, oh, well, how can we, fit that? How can we support that? How can we engage with this? As I hope I've shown, for those of you working in higher education institutes, so I know there's lots of pressure on to publish academic research, this is not an alternative to doing academic peer-reviewed research. This is something that can be combined and you're getting really good quality, useful research because it's informed by practitioners. Something Alison said about one of the things that she learned, actually, that helped her most as a teacher was having been a parent. And I think it's really important, actually, that we recognise students bring expertise when they come in at the beginning of their ITE programs. So, there are lots of student teachers who have already worked for years as classroom assistants, perhaps family learning workers, perhaps, helping out in nurseries or playgroups or whatever, or parents themselves. And I think there can be a tendency, certainly when I did my ITE at Murray House about 30 years ago, I'd worked as a residential care worker. I'd worked in therapeutic communities. I felt completely de-skilled by the program. I felt like I was being told that everything I had learned before I had to unlearn because I needed to learn to be a teacher. And I don't think that's helpful. I'm not sure if that's still going on, but if it is, I think we need to cut that out and we need to recognise the different sources of expertise that people bring to all the different roles that we have. And my final point is just do it. Don't wait for somebody to tell you to do it. Don't wait for somebody to ask you to do it. Just get ahead and do it.